Good morning, friends. Sorry, I had COVID earlier this week, and so I'm fine. I feel great. But I got a little froggy in my throat just suddenly, so sorry if I'm a little bleh in the, No, I'll be good. Thank you, though. Today, I'd like to start just right away by reading the gospel. So if we can get those words up on the screen, that would be so great. All right, hear these words today. Right then, Jesus made his disciples get into a boat and go ahead to the other side of the lake toward Bethsaida while he dismissed the crowd. After saying goodbye to them, Jesus went up onto a mountain to pray. Evening came and the boat was in the middle of the lake, but he was alone on the land. Jesus saw his disciples struggling. They were trying to row forward, but the wind was blowing against them. Very early in the morning, he came to them, walking on the lake. He intended to pass by them. And when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost, and they screamed. Seeing him was terrifying to all of them. And just then he spoke to them, "Be encouraged. It's me. Do not be afraid." And he got into the boat, and the wind settled down. His disciples were so baffled, they were beside themselves. That's because they hadn't understood about the loaves. Their minds had been closed so that they resisted God's ways. And when Jesus and his disciples had crossed the lake, they landed at Gennesaret, anchored the boat, and came ashore. And people immediately recognized Jesus and ran around that whole region, bringing sick people on their mats to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, villages, cities, or farming communities, they would place the sick in the marketplaces and beg him to allow them to touch even the hem of his clothing. Everyone who touched him was healed. The word of the Lord. How many of you were here last week when Pastor Terry preached? Okay, great. If you weren't able to hear that sermon, I highly encourage you to go back and give it a watch or a listen via Salt House website or the YouTube channel. Pastor Terry was one of my internship supervisors 12 or 13 years ago, however long ago, a long time ago. And in my first call as an ordained person, I was called to be a partner with him in the work of the Catacomb Churches, which was a network of house churches that worked to create intentional communities that were attentive to our neighbors and our neighborhoods, and who utilized the methodologies of community organizing to help see and nurture the humanity of one another while building capacity and awareness of how to shift systems and structures and even church. And I share this with you so that you know a small piece of what has shaped my own theological and biblical purview, that the way that I preach and teach comes from being formed by Terry, a fabulous mentor, and one whom one of my kids, I won't say which one, said on the drive home from church last week, Terry is God's favorite. To which I said, it's true. And he'd never say that, ever, or even own it. But I know. And so does God. And so do my kids. And now, so do you. Okay, so get comfy, whatever that means for you. Because we're going to dig in this morning and jump right in with a question that humans have been wrestling with since about 1875 or so. So not a contextually similar question to Mark's story today, but it does shape our experience of Mark's narrative. Who owns the ultimate truth? Science or biblical tradition? So good. This question has really screwed us up. It's led to a solid fight between the power of poetry and objective fact. Around the late 1800s, science and the culture that came along with it began to question reality, the truth behind things unseen, and began the work of shaping a culture, particularly American culture, for our intents and purposes today. So to better understand the disparity of American Christianity from the intent and context of the writers of Scripture, we need to be like Pastor Terry, who studies the first century culture to know how to differentiate between the science of knowing and the poetry of knowing. For most of human history, no one would have even thought that this next question was a worthy question to ask. Did Jesus walk on actual water? They would have focused on what this story was trying to portray. The magic and wonder of science changed the narrative. We were able to continue believing that God may have created the universe because science couldn't disprove it. But God couldn't possibly raise Jesus from the dead. Science doesn't permit that. So to push back on this scientific rejection of the Christian faith narrative, religious circles began to say, no, the Bible is all true, exactly the way that it's written. But friends, nothing is as it always is. We're always interpreting through our own sense of culture and experience. Now, I don't know if Jesus walked on actual water, but last week, Pastor Terry said that God created the universe, and if I can believe that that could be true, then certainly it could be true that God can walk on water through Jesus. But then we're posed with a new question, a theodicy question. Theodicy being the explanation for God being all good and all powerful, and yet allowing evil and suffering to exist. If God can do this, then why doesn't God do that? But the people in the first century would have likely heard this story of Jesus walking on stormy water not as a literal and scientific factual experience, but rather as a callback to the creation story of the Babylonians, which said, the world was made out of a chaos monster that was defeated and split into two parts, becoming each part the sky and the earth. And in that world origin story, humans were created specifically to be slaves, to stop the rotting stink of the corpse of this decaying chaos monster. And when she was being well tended, the seas would toil. When she was not being well tended, the seas would toil and swarm. And when humans were in their proper place as slaves to the world system, the seas would be calm. Additionally, in Roman culture, the world order narrative went like this, that the god Re appointed his son Pharaoh to rule the world, and humans were meant to be slaves and serve the hierarchical masterhood of Pharaoh, who was known to be the Son of God, like the image that Pastor Terry showed us last week. These are the narratives that were prevalent in the time of Mark, who was retelling the story of Jesus' ministry to his contemporaries. And remember that these gospel stories weren't written down immediately, and they were heard for years before they were ever written down. And thusly, in Mark's writing, his retelling of Jesus' ministry was probably not unlike a preacher referencing Taylor Swift's engagement or the Mariners' historic wins this week might be to us. Right? So as we look at this story now, as Mark's contemporaries would have seen it, and in connection to what Pastor Terry shared last week about the loaves and fishes story being a callback to the escape from Egypt and the journey towards humanity, this week is also a callback for Mark's audience. If chaotic waters represented the stirring of a slayed chaos monster, it was also important to remember that the Roman Empire claimed ownership over all the water. So anything that was fished from these waters were taxed to benefit Rome, and you could only be on the water with permission. This imagery of the disciples being in chaotic water, rowing through strong winds for a long time, see Jesus walking on the top of that water, being fully human, not a slave, in a time of chaos. And that's a miracle. It was a miracle that he was a human in the time of division and dehumanization and domination. And in showing them what was possible, he freaked them out. And it would have been terrifying to them, this idea that human beings can live another way. Jesus, being who he was and living in the midst of this horrifically dehumanizing system, knew that this new information would have freaked them out, would have felt overwhelming. He knew that they were wrestling with the question of how could they possibly change this whole system? How can it be possible to be human in the midst of this? And so Jesus slows down. He doesn't ask us to go faster than we can possibly go. He only asks us to take the next step. Because we can't see how this is all going to work out. It could go horribly wrong. But Jesus comes into the boat with them and he said, "Hey, I'm here. Don't be afraid." And calms the water so they can keep going, one stroke at a time. And so for us, the metaphor for us in our moment in time might be something like this. Fascism hinders people's ability to know what they can do to defeat dehumanization by stacking challenge upon challenge upon challenge and pitting the health of one in-group against the well-being of another. If capitalism went away tomorrow, would we still have access to food? Kind of freaks you out. Do we even dare to hope that American democracy could not just be restored, but refreshed and reformed so that everybody benefits from it? Kind of freaks our privilege out. We might not be ready for that which we hope to see. And Jesus says that we're being invited to be human in an inhuman time. And we aren't the first ones to experience this. We likely won't be the last. But history, our faith, and our stories of God's justice and Jesus' humanity remind us and have reminded countless others that God has the power to create order out of chaos and remind us of who we are. But God doesn't ask us to take more than that next step. And we have to face the fact that in taking that next step, we could sink into the water. We might fall in, get wet. And when we do, Mark is telling us that Jesus is there, that he has been there, that he will be there to take our hand, pull us up, and help us get started again. Friends, we can look around us and see so many things that are just horrendous. Things happening in this world to our siblings and to creation that make us panic and struggle and strive so hard to see what could ever be good again. How can we ever fix this mess? And yet we get to look at Mark and see Jesus coming around the corner to tell us that there's nothing new under the sun. Empires have risen and fallen time and time and time again. And you know what's constant? Jesus. It's me. Don't be afraid. Now, I know, I'm no fool, this might feel contrite. And I know it might feel minimizing of the horrors of our current moment. Let me be the first to say that I am not done panicking. My trans child is not safe. My own queerness is really easy to hide when I'm married to someone of a different gender identity and expression than myself. My insulin-dependent child could lose the limited access to quasi-affordable insulin that we have as a family who has been uninsured for 2+ years and imports our insulin from Canada. My prayers and my energy and my willpower don't seem like even enough to light a match to this dumpster fire that I hear about and am warned is yet to come every single time I turn on my NPR app. It's hard out here, friends. And sometimes I don't see Jesus calming any waters. I see a ghost freaking me the F out. But here's a word for you and for me that I can trust. The Berlin Wall came down. The Iron Curtain was dropped. The Roman Empire fell. There's nothing new under the sun. And it seems that empires don't last forever. And people persevered through their God-given humanity to share their stories of what saw them through deconstruction and carried a history forward for us to learn from. Not everyone made it. Not everyone believed it could be. And democracy isn't perfect, not by a long shot. But Mark reminds us, as he reminded those in the first century, that God's constant message of the gift we have to be human and to be human together with Jesus. Who knows what that's like, friends? Trusting that when we don't know what's next, God does. And Jesus says, God's bigger than this. I'm with you. Don't be afraid. Amen.